And Holy Spirit, we need you so much. You are the Spirit of wisdom and knowledge and understanding. Come and be our teacher this morning. In Jesus' name. Amen. So just as a reminder, we're looking at Book 2 of the Psalms. And while Book 1 was pretty much all Psalms of David, a couple of Psalms were not titled, but most likely they were Psalms of David. When we looked at Book 2, it actually started with Psalm 42, which was the Psalm of the sons of Korah, and then there are a whole bunch of about 10 Psalms of the sons of Korah, then one of Asaph. We'll do some Psalms of his a bit later. And from Psalm 51 onwards, again it's David's Psalms for the rest of the book, except for the last Psalm, which is a Psalm written by Solomon. Okay, so we start with this Psalm 51, and the title says it all for the director of music, a Psalm of David, when the prophet Nathan came to him after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba. Okay. And we are actually going to do this Psalm over 2 days or 2 mornings. I'm only going to do Psalm verses 1 to 9 today, because there was so much to share in those 9 verses, and then we'll do 10 to 19 tomorrow. Okay, so the context of the psalm, which we see in the title, and to look at it briefly, 2 Samuel chapter 11, everybody knows the story of David and Bathsheba. If you look at 2 Samuel chapter 11, no need to go there, but in most of our Bibles the subtitle is David and Bathsheba. And of course the story in a nutshell is that David sees Bathsheba bathing, desires her, calls her to his palace, sleeps with her, she gets pregnant. He tries to get Uriah, who's her husband and who's at war. In fact, he was one of David's mighty men, so he was someone close to David. Tries to get him, he calls him back from the battlefield, gets him to sleep, tries to get him to sleep with Bathsheba so that everybody will think the child is hers, is his. Uriah doesn't do that. Eventually he gets his general Joab to send him into the thick of battle and make sure that he dies, and then David marries Bathsheba. They have a child, and between 1 and 2 years later Nathan comes and confronts him. So in 2 Samuel chapter 11, we see David breaking 4 of the 10 commandments. Okay, not just ordinary sins, 4 of the 10 commandments. He starts with number 10, which is coveting. Then there's number 7, which is adultery. Then there's number 6, which is murder. And when Nathan comes and confronts him, Nathan uses an analogy which basically says that he also violated commandment number 8, which was stealing, because he stole Uriah's wife. Okay. I'm also going to include number 9, which is to do with lying or deception, or at least an attempted deception, because he was hoping to deceive everybody, including Uriah, that the baby was his, if he had gotten away with it. Okay. And in 2 Samuel chapter 12, we have Nathan coming, God sending Nathan to confront David. And of course that is the title, when Nathan came to him. Just want to read one verse in 2 Samuel. Okay, so Nathan basically confronts him and then tells him that you are the one who has sinned. And in verse 13, then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Okay, after all that Nathan says, David just has one sentence to say in reply. I have sinned against the Lord. Okay. And you can keep that whole context in mind as we look at Psalm 51. Okay. Psalm 51 is divided into actually 6 sections, and we're looking at the first 3 sections today. The first section is, we may title it a plea for mercy. That's verses 1 and 2, and that's how David starts Psalm 51. Okay, he says, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin." And so right at the beginning, David begins not with his sin, but with God's nature. You see, he lays a basis, a foundation for what he wants to say. Okay, he says, "Have mercy on me, O God." Why? According to your unfailing love. Why bother to come and ask for forgiveness or mercy or grace if God is not a God who will give it, if that is not in his nature? Okay, so have mercy on me, God. Actually, the better word there is, God, show favor to me, be gracious to me. It's more than mercy, it's really favor and grace. Okay, God, be gracious to me, God, show favor to me. And the reason why I can come to you and ask for this grace and favor and mercy, if you want to use that word, is because of your unfailing love. Okay? That word unfailing love is actually just one word. It is chesed. It is a word. It can be translated love. It can be translated loving kindness. It refers to God's covenant love. Okay? If it was translated into New Testament terminology, they would use the word agape, which is the Greek word for unconditional, intentional love, which is the word used for God's love for us. Okay, so this is the Old Testament equivalent of agape. Okay, he says, according to your unfailing love, according to your chesed, and according to your great compassion. And that word compassion, it's the great compassion, it's abundant compassion, the multitudes of your compassion. Okay? That word for compassion is the same word used for the womb. And so it gives you that sense of, so in fact the older translations have, according to your tender mercies. That word tender, that sense of tender comes because of the womb. Though the literal meaning will be your abundant compassion. And that compassion has that sense of the womb, that sense of being tender. Okay, and David is saying, God, I know you are this kind of God, and that is why I'm coming to you, okay, and asking for favor and for you to be gracious to us. And then he's asking God to do 3 things. He says, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, he says, do 3 things. Blot out my transgressions, wash away all my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. So we'll just unpack these 3 lines a little bit. They are parallelism because there are 3 ways of saying the same thing, but they are different words. Okay, he asks God to blot out or to remove. Okay, clear my record, clean off my record completely. Okay, that blot out was used in Genesis 6 when God was going to blot out all mankind from the land. That kind of word. Just take it all away once and for all. Okay, and of course only God can do that. It reminds you of Paul. Paul recognized that his transgressions had been blotted out. That's why he could be the person that God wanted him to be. If he remained in that place of continuous guilt that he was a murderer of Christians, he could never have done what God wanted him to do. But he knew that God had blotted out his transgressions. So David is saying, blot out my transgressions, remove them from my record. Okay. Then he's saying, wash away all my iniquity. Okay. That word for wash away is the word used for laundry in the Old Testament. It's almost always used for clothes. And so it's referring to an external cleansing. Okay. So for example, if a person had a spot of mildew on his clothes, those clothes were washed and then they could not be used for a while. Or you were washed if you were unclean, but then you had to wait till evening to be pronounced clean. And so this is a washing that is not complete. It is preparation for another washing, which is purification, which is the third word, and cleanse me from my sin, or purify me. And that is the word that is used for temple purification. Wash away is used for the washing of clothes, and cleanse is used for the purification for temple purposes. Okay? And so those three words are used: blot out or remove or clear my record, wash away, or let there be an external cleansing, and I'll later on tell you a little more about that external cleansing. And thirdly, cleanse me, that's an inner purification. That's what David is asking for. Okay? He wants a complete cleansing and purification. But even more interesting are the three words he uses for sin. He says, blot out my transgressions, wash away all my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. The word transgression means rebellion. Okay? To rebel against God. The word iniquity means something that is twisted or bent. When you should be straight, it's twisted. And that word sin means missing the mark. So you fire an arrow and it misses the mark. The bullseye is God's standard and you miss the mark. And so there are these three words for sin and three ways in which therefore we can look at sin, and David uses all those three words to describe his sin. Okay. What is even more interesting is that he uses plural words and singular words. My transgressions, cleanse me from my sin. Okay. What is the point he's making there? That sins are acts. Okay. We commit sinful acts, but they are a manifestation of sin, which is our nature, which is part of our character. Okay. And so often we say, no, oh, he's a good chap, but he just did this wrong thing. You know, David will not look at it that way. He says, I know I am a sinner. There is sin within me. And out of that, I commit sins. Often we are ready to even think about sins, the acts, but not about sin, which is within us. Okay? And David is very clear. He uses both those words throughout the psalm. He talks of sin as well as sins. He talks of his nature or character or who he is in a sense in this situation, as well as what he has done, which are those acts. Okay? And the other thing before we go into the next verse is that he says, he tells God, your unfailing love, your great compassion, those are God's character. But he says, my transgressions, my iniquity, my sin, he takes full ownership of what he has done and who he is. Okay? Again, there's a tendency to separate ourselves from our acts. Okay? Blot out these, he could have said, blot out these transgressions, blot out this sin. And then you sort of distance yourself from that act. But David takes full ownership of what he's done. And of course, it's reflected in that one line. The moment Nathan speaks, he says, "I have sinned." Not a trace of an excuse. The contrast actually is with Saul before him, King Saul. When King Saul is similarly confronted by Samuel the prophet that he has sinned, King Saul immediately starts to make excuses. He makes excuses for why he has done what he has done, and he tries to paint it in a positive light. David does nothing of the sort. So here we have his petition, okay, taking full ownership of the full extent of his sin and of the acts that he has done, but knowing that he comes to God on the basis and the foundation of God's unfailing love, God's great compassion, His tender mercies, and He pleads for mercy, He pleads for grace. Okay. The second part is verses 3 to 6, it's confession. Okay. And then David confesses his sin. I'm reading from 3 to 6. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are proved right when you speak and justified when you judge. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Surely you desire truth in the inner parts, you teach me wisdom in the inmost place. Okay. So verse 3 we again see my transgressions and my sin. Okay. Both his acts and where those acts came from sin in his heart. Both those are, he says, those are always before me. He says, I am well aware of what I have done wrong, which leads us to believe that he's of course been well aware all this time. Okay. Probably all along these couple of years it's been at the back of his mind, but he's managed to push it away, and that's something we also do with willful sin all the time. We just push away that conviction, that reality. Okay. And we live with it in a sense. And David has been doing that. After Uriah died, they waited for the mourning period, and then he marries Bathsheba, and she gives birth to the child, which was actually conceived in adultery. And he's been living like this for the past couple of years, until Nathan comes and confronts him. Okay. So David says, my sin is always before me, no excuses again. Okay, we'll keep coming to that again and again, that he just refuses to make any excuses. He says, against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. That's such an interesting statement, because has he not murdered Uriah? Has he not violated Bathsheba? Has he not, in fact, put his nation at risk because of what he has done? Betrayed their trust. Okay? But his betrayal of God blots out all other thoughts. He is so aware of what he has done in God's sight. He's so convicted of how grievously he has violated God's commands that it's like everything else has faded away. And all he can think of is, I have sinned against God. I have hurt God, I have betrayed Him, I have violated His commands. Okay, he says, I have done what is evil in God's sight. You see, what is evil in God's sight is all that matters to David, not what is evil in people's sight. What happened to X, Y, or Z, or what X, Y, or Z thinks about it. All that matters to David. Okay, because David, we know David is a man after God's own heart. He had such a relationship with God. So can you imagine the 1 or 2 years that he has been separated from God, getting on with his life with Bathsheba. Okay, and sort of it's as if those Nathan's words. Okay, in 2 Samuel 12 verse 9, one of the things that Nathan says is what he's actually echoing back in this psalm. Nathan says in verse 9, why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? Okay, what you did was evil in his sight, and David uses the same words again in this psalm. He says that I have sinned against you, you alone. Okay. If you want to think of something parallel in the New Testament, when Jesus says, hate your father and mother. Of course, we know he doesn't mean hate them. He means that our love for him should be so overwhelming that everything else looks like hate. And that's what's happened here for David. David's awareness of what he has done against God is so overwhelming that that's all that matters. He's not even thinking about the people that he has hurt. He's just thinking about his relationship with God. Okay. Also, in a sense, there's nothing he can do. There's no restitution he can give. He's already killed. Uriah is already dead. Bathsheba is already his wife. So there's not really something that he can do in this context in terms of restitution, which is why God does not ask him for restitution. So he says, I've done this evil so that you are proved right when you speak and justified when you judge. And I like that word justified because what often happens is we justify our behavior, no, to God. We make excuses, we explain it away, we rationalize why we've done something. Okay? But David says, God, you are justified. You have judged me to have sinned, and that is a right judgment. You are justified. He does not justify himself. I think of examples of justification like if somebody is poor and they stole. You know, they stole something, oh, that's because I was poor. Okay? People get offended by something and they will riot in the streets and they will justify it by no, but we whatever. Well, you burned somebody's car and you broke somebody's shop. They did nothing to you. You know, they will justify it. David does not justify what he has done. Okay? From the beginning to the end, we see that he takes complete ownership and complete responsibility for what he's done. You know, he could even have made an excuse, but she was bathing in public, which she appears to have been doing. You know, he could have said anything. Absolutely no excuses. God, you are right. You have passed judgment on me. You are absolutely right. Okay. Verse 5. He continues his confession. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Okay. Now this is either hyperbole, you know, he is really going in depth in how sinful he is, or from this comes the doctrine of original sin, which has made the very act of being conceived by a man and a woman the start of sin. Okay. Or it could be that David was an illegitimate child. And I've shared this, some of you will have been there for the teaching, where there's fairly strong internal evidence that David may have been an illegitimate child. Now let's take the translation a different way, which is the actual literal translation. Surely I was brought forth in iniquity. I was conceived in sin. Okay? Not sinful from the time my mother conceived me. I was conceived in sin. I was brought forth or given birth to in iniquity. And there's a strong tradition that David was born of Jesse having an affair or something illegitimate with somebody, either somebody else who was married or a slave girl or whatever. Okay, and that explains one very odd thing. Now, why was David in the field when Samuel came? And Samuel told Jesse, bring all your sons. And why did Jesse not bring all his sons? Okay. Yes, David was the youngest, so what? Sometimes the youngest is the most doted on. You know? So it's as if Jesse has brought his sons, the legitimate sons, and when Samuel says, are these all? He says, oh, there's one more. You see, it makes sense in that context. You see, I mean, I cannot say 100% that's what it was, but it just makes sense. Okay? The second thing that is said from that internal evidence is that it says of David that he was ruddy. The actual word is red, okay, which seems to refer to his hair. So why would they refer to his hair in a specific way? It must have been different from the other people's hair. Okay, it's only used twice in the Bible, once for David and once for Esau. Esau was called Edom because he was red. Okay? And so it seems to be that David is speaking of his birth, his illegitimacy, and there's one other psalm where it's equally obvious that David is speaking this way. He seems to be speaking this way about his family life. Okay, but what David is acknowledging is a legacy of sin from his very conception. Okay, he is not using it as an excuse at all, but he's saying, yeah, I have a legacy of sin, and I am a sinner, and I've committed these sins. Verse 6 is a little difficult to understand. Surely you desire truth in the inner parts, you teach me wisdom in the inmost place. Okay. The first part makes sense. Surely you desire truth. God is looking for total honesty from your innermost being, and of course that's the opposite of what David has done. Okay. David has deceived. David has, in a sense, almost as if he lived a lie for a couple of years. Did he not know that God had noticed? But yet there's hope, because God will teach him wisdom in the inmost place or in the hidden place. So even when he is hidden and he's been hiding in sin, God can still teach him wisdom. Okay, this is a little complicated, and no commentary I read was able to really explain what David is saying here in the middle of this confession. But overall, these 4 verses are David confessing that yes, he is a sinner. In fact, he has a legacy of sin from his very conception, and what he has done is evil in God's sight. He has sinned against God, and so grievously that that's all he can think about. God has sinned against you. And finally, verses 7 to 9 are a plea for cleansing. Okay, he goes back to that theme of wanting to be cleansed, and he expands on that a bit. He says, "Cleanse me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins, and blot out all my iniquity." Okay, verse 7 is the same words, cleanse and wash. Cleanse as purify, and wash as laundry washing. Okay, he says, "Cleanse me with hyssop." What is he referring to? He's referring to in Exodus and in Leviticus. In the law, there were times when, for example, a leper was purified after he was cleansed, or a place was purified. The priest was to take a branch of hyssop, which is a kind of herb, and dip it in the blood and use that to sprinkle what was to be considered cleansed or purified. And so he's saying, do that for me. He's asking for purification, that is spiritual purity, but he's also saying, wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Okay, here he's talking about a change in lifestyle, to put away the evil things, just as a dress was washed and now it was clean and they were put on again. Okay, he's talking about that kind of a cleansing of his life, as well as a cleansing of his innermost being, his soul, which only God could do through the blood of the sacrifice. Which is why I've got all these things of the cross here today. We sang "Worthy is the Lamb," because for us now, what cleanses us is the blood of Jesus. Okay. Verse 8, he wants joy and gladness instead of the bones you have crushed. The bones also refer to the innermost being. He's saying, I'm crushed from deep inside. He's crushed by what he's feeling, by the fact that God is angry with him, upset with him. And that picture of being crushed to powder, but that's his spirit that is crushed. And he's saying, instead of that, give me joy and gladness. And finally he says, hide your face from my sins, not from me. Because he's feeling at this point that God has hidden his face from him, of course, which is what God says that he will do. Okay, maybe over these 2 years, while he's been having this wonderful time with Bathsheba, he's been feeling that sense of God hiding his face from him. You know? And it all comes to the forefront when Nathan confronts him. And he again goes on to what he said in the beginning, blot out all my iniquity. Just clean the slate. Let's begin again, so to speak. Clean my record completely, please, he says to God. Okay? And this is really the first half of the psalm. We see his plea for mercy, and we see his complete and utter and confession without excuses, without justification, without rationalization, and his desire to be cleansed from within and from outside in terms of his lifestyle. We see his acceptance not just of his sins but of himself as a sinner. Okay, David is not just a wonderful example of praising God, but is also a wonderful example of a penitent, being able to come and ask God for forgiveness.